One of my buddies is a pastor in rural Nebraska, and his pastoral tenure started out a tidbit rocky. And it wasn't because of his preaching style. It wasn't because he wasn't like following the Bible, or there was some sort of problem with the vision he had for the church or managing staff. That wasn't it at all. The problem was housing. Now, in church world, a lot of times churches, instead of paying a ton in cash salary, will try to provide some sort of housing, whether that's a parsonage, which is a house that church owns and maintains, or providing a housing allowance, which is an amount of money that's not taxed to try to help cover the costs of housing. Now, he, like me, when we graduated seminary, you're kind of like, whoa, right? All right, where are we going to go? How are we going to handle this as a family? And housing options are a really helpful part of landing in the right place, the right position, and then moving forward for what God has on you. It's one less stress level. It still helps a lot. Now, with he was interviewing at a church, and the housing situation was complicated because the previous pastor there had means and had just bought his own place in town, and the church owned a parsonage, but over a long period of time, it just fell into disrepair. It wasn't really redeemable. So by the time my buddy is looking to maybe land there, they're like, we don't really know what we're going to do in terms of housing. But they said, let's strike a deal, okay? If you commit to us, my friend, to the church, we'll commit to you and your family. And before you get here, we'll make sure that we have a legitimate housing option available. Okay? Sound decent? So he's like, we'll pray about it, we'll think about it, get back. Yes, we're willing to make that commitment. We'll trust you. Now, day after day, week after week, month after month, there's not really any progress at all towards finding a real housing option for my buddy and his family to land. And I remember him calling and talking to me like, what is going on? Like, what could I do? What sort of ways? Like, how would you counsel me? Talk to the board? Should I get the district superintendent involved? It was a stressful time. And it wasn't for lack of effort on his part. He talked to his vice chair regularly. Their board was meeting frequently. But when it comes to rural Nebraska, there's not a lot of housing options. Real teensy tiny rental options, right? And then houses don't really come on the market. If they do, it's not the kind of house you'd oftentimes want to live in. So they're kind of stuck. And the problem wasn't means. They had enough cash reserves from their church to be able to buy a house outright and not even affect their operating budget. So he was having a really hard time with, like, they told me to trust them, and they're not doing anything day after day, week after week, month after month. The district superintendent got involved. He was trying to speed the deal along, and things just weren't working. I was praying. He was praying. The church was praying. Basically, anybody who knew the situation was praying. And it's just like, why isn't God doing something? Why isn't the church willing to commit if they said to trust him? Now, what ends up happening is right before they moved, the church did, in fact, buy a house and secure an option for him and his family, and it's been great. Other than the relational challenge of, looking at the same people leading the board who were like, trust us, and then kind of put them through a season of really challenging time. Obviously, they came through, though, and that's kind of what mattered at the main thing. Has anybody, though, here been through a situation in your life where you trusted somebody, like a family member or a close friend, even a work colleague, and they just didn't come through for you? Like, you trusted your parents to maybe bail you out of the situation, and they didn't come through this time. Or you asked your buddy to pick you up from the airport, and they just plumb forgot, and you're just standing there with a backpack, like, what am I going to do now? Luckily, there's Uber and Lyft now. I'll come pick you up. There's options. Or perhaps a work colleague of yours that you've trusted and that you've worked with on multiple projects. They knew you were up for a promotion. You put them down for a reference, and when they got the reference, they didn't come through for you. Maybe they kind of rolled you under the bus. Those things really erode our ability to trust people, don't they? In fact, in some of those relationships, they don't always bounce back if the rift is that bad, if the lack of trust is so heavy at that point in your life. Now, anybody ever had your parents not pick you up from a sporting event or an after-school thing? Jackson's at the back. You guys all had good parents. So as far as I can tell, as I was searching my mind this past week, I couldn't think of any major things where my parents weren't there or were dramatically late. There were times, 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and things started to get a little bit choppy because I grew up in the age where kids didn't have cell phones. So you're just kind of stuck there landlocked, Are they going to come? But my parents came through. In fact, there were some times where I wish my parents didn't come through. I got to speak on this passage that I'm going to talk through today at Crew 6 months ago. And I told them when I was in middle school and the beginning of high school, during the football off season, there was weightlifting. Monday afternoons, Wednesday afternoons, and Thursday afternoons. So I'd say after school, getting shredded, which did me a lot of good, right? And I had to rely on my parents to come and pick me up. And that was a little bit of a finagling thing for their schedules. You know what that's like, to try to work around your kids and all of their different things. And so I would have to wait for them to come pick me up, along with my other buddies who couldn't drive cars yet either. We'd go and sit out in front of the middle school, which was where the weightlifting gym was, on this kind of rock wall and just wait. Now, my mom at the time drove a green, lime green Volkswagen punch buggy. You know what I'm talking about? Like punch buggy, no punchback style. And she had a big pink flower in the little cup. Did you know punch buggies come with a flower cup? They would sit there, and it said Dream Bug on the license plate. It was a little stick shift. She loved that car. And when you're driving with your mom in that car, it's fine. But my dad used to like to tease me, right? So he knew, these are all the macho middle school and high school people. Okay. So he would intentionally sometimes go home, trade cars, and show up to pick me up from weightlifting in this green punch buggy and, have my friend, snickering and punching each other and stuff. And luckily, I have a pretty decent self-esteem, so it didn't bother me too much, but he just liked to kind of rub it in a little bit. And I'd have to get over there after doing squats and fall down into the punch buggy because it's so low to the ground. You know what I'm talking about? There are times where I wished, man, maybe just somebody didn't come to pick me up today. The long walk home might have done me good in that moment. There's a real-life story in the Gospel of John in chapter 11 that I think all of us can identify with the pain to some degree. But I don't know if everybody in the room identifies with the victory at the end of the story. And so I want to talk through this today where a real friend doesn't show up in time. And how is the relationship going to continue to develop from here? It's a real question. So Jesus, at this point in the story, has been on the receiving end of more mobs than you ever have in your life. He's pushing the envelope everywhere he goes. The urgency in the message has risen. And so almost any time he comes into contact with a group of people, by the end of him talking, they're bending down to pick up stones. So being in Judea, Jerusalem, and the surrounding areas is really sketchy for him. He's had to flee for his life multiple times. In this story, he's literally just done that. Public sentiment has forced him to leave the region, and he gets a communique from people that he really cares about at the worst possible time. Here's how it goes. John chapter 11, verse 1. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany, which is right outside of Jerusalem, with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother, Lazarus, was sick. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, Lord, your dear friend, other translations say, the one whom you love. This is such a profound statement, actually, that it's led major New Testament scholars in the 20th century and the 21st century to believe maybe it's even Lazarus who wrote this gospel because of the way he's referred to here. And the Gospel of John talks about light and life as if somebody's had their eyes opened from death. It's such a profound moment. Lord, your dear friend, this one that you love, is very sick. Have you ever had a close friend or family member get really sick? Not just down and out for the day, but sketchy sick, long-term sick. What do you do when that happens? You change your life to do whatever you can to help them, don't you? I mean, you help with the kids. You pick up the meds if you need to. You help with cooking. Even if you have to call into work and strain your relationship with your boss, you're like, I got to be there. This is my family. This is my sister. This is my mom. This is my dad. This is my best friend since I was a little kid. I got to be there. Wouldn't you want to be there if your dear friend was very, very sick? So for Martha and Mary, the expectations are even higher than just our everyday friendship or familial relationship, because Jesus is a rabbi. He's the equivalent, although a little bit higher, to the pastor in that day and age. And a lot of times now, pastors are kind of responsible to step in that moment. Like when somebody's really sick or heaven forbid somebody dies, like your schedule gets rewritten. You got to be there to pray with them. You got to be there to help them grieve. You do whatever you got to do to be there. That's the religious leader expectation. This is your best friend and your pastor. He's going to come, right? Jesus, the one whom you love, is so sick. He needs your help. And I'm sure as they sent out that message with the messenger, that Mary and Martha in the room with Lazarus, maybe one holding the hand, maybe that's Mary. She liked to do that, kind of sit there, hold her hand. And Martha, who's pictured as like the worker, maybe she's dabbing his head and the brow, get rid of the sweat while he's struggling. And I'm sure in that moment that they looked down at Lazarus and said, Lazarus, it's going to be okay. Jesus knows. He's their buddy. He's their pastor. He's going to come. I sense the trust in this story. He's going to show up. It's going to be okay. He'll be here in time. This is what Jesus says when he hears it. Verse 4. Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. So although Jesus loved, we know this, Martha and Mary and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. He ignores seemingly the urgency in all of this. Anybody's first reaction to reading this message being a little bit frustrated with Jesus? Like, what are you doing, man? You've got the opportunity and the means. Best buddy, rabbi. You didn't even send positive vibes in a Facebook comment. Where's the casserole and the get well card, right? Nothing. You could have at least made some sort of effort. Well, before we get super mad at Jesus, I want to bring a couple things to the forefront. Remember, just in this same passage, we're told he's narrowly escaped death in this region. Going there is no easy feat. And he came for a big reason. So this one thing is going to be really hard to pull off. But secondly, I think one of the reasons why Mary and Martha may not have been perturbed by this response from Jesus is he gave a very similar response in chapter 4 of the Gospel of John. If you've been reading this with us, that you might be familiar as this kind of washes over your ears. Do you remember the healing of the official son in chapter 4? And how that happened and how trust and belief in Jesus is what made him well? Let me read the story for you just to refresh you. This is in chapter 4, earlier in the story. Mary and Martha would have known about this when they get word back from Jesus that Lazarus is going to be okay. It will not end in death. Here's what happens. As he traveled through Galilee, this is Jesus, he came to Cana where he had turned water to wine. There was a government official in nearby Capernaum whose son was very sick. And when he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal his son, who was about to die. Similar situation, right? Jesus asks, will you never believe me unless you see these miraculous signs and wonders? And the official says, look, it's not about that. It's just about my boy. The Lord, please come now before my little boy dies. It's laser focused. And Jesus tells him, go back home. Your son will live. So that man believed what Jesus said and started home. And while that man was on his way home, his servants met him with the news that his son was alive and well. And he asked them when the boy had begun to get better. And they replied, yesterday afternoon at 1 o'clock, his fever suddenly disappeared. And then the father realized, putting this all together in his brain, that was the very time that Jesus said, your son will live. And what happens is the entire household believes in Jesus. Amazing story, right? Could you imagine the smile that's popping up on the messenger's face? Jesus, the dude you love, he's sick. He's really sick. He needs your help. And Jesus looks at him and says, this will not end in Lazarus' death. I'm sure that dude was like, oh, shoot. We're about to get one of those stories. Jesus is going to show up. I bet he went back to Mary and Martha overjoyed to say, Jesus knows. He knows your pain. And he says you're going to be okay. Trust him. I'm sure they were like, oh, we're all over this. We trust you, Jesus. But what happens? Lazarus doesn't get better. the official son does. Lazarus, the one whom Jesus supposedly loves, his best buddy, his pal, his parishioner, he doesn't get better. Doesn't go how we expected at all. Verse 7 says this, finally, Jesus says to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. Can you imagine how that finally must have felt? Finally, after way too much time had elapsed. He says to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. And even still, knowing the situation, the disciples objected, Rabbi, only a few days ago, people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you seriously about to go there again? Like, slow your roll. This is not an okay place for you to go. And then Jesus, in Johannine fashion, says this, there are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They see because they have the light of the world. But at night, there's danger of stumbling because they have no light. He knows the questions that Mary and Martha are dealing with because he's not there and hasn't showed up. And then he says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I must go now to wake him up. And the disciples are like, dude, come on, man. They never get it. They're always daft. If he's just sleeping, he's going to be fine, right? He'll wake up. We're good to go. Though Jesus obviously meant that Lazarus had actually died. And so he plainly tells him, Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad. Isn't that the dude that Jesus loves? How could you even get those words out of your mouth? Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad. Like, there's a reason. He says, for your sake, now people are going to come to believe, but that's his buddy. That's his parishioner. He trusted Jesus, and Jesus is glad. Anybody have a hard time with that depiction of Jesus? Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. There's more going on in Lazarus' story that Jesus is aware of, that everyone else isn't. Same thing's true for you. There's more going on in your story. The things that you're mad at Jesus for, offended by, he's going to do something special. I believe it. Just in case you're thinking, man, he's Jesus, it would have been just fine. Thomas, after Jesus says this, says, let's go to it. Let's die with Jesus. This is a really stressful thing, going back to Judea. Well, here's what happens when he gets there. The excuse that it's a perilous journey doesn't go well for Mary and Martha. Wouldn't go well for you either, right? If your best buddy didn't show up when you needed him. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went out to him. I imagine she took some time to gather herself, get her thoughts in order, think of the exact things she wants to say to Jesus. But Mary stays in the house. This was normal. Somebody had to be there to deal with all the people. Martha says to Jesus in this moment, Lord, if you'd only been here. I kind of imagine her walking out to Jesus with the Elaine Bennis hit you in the chest thing, Lord, if you'd only been here. Where were you at? If you were here, if you'd only shown up, we trusted you. My brother wouldn't have died. We trusted you. And you didn't come. I want you to put that pain in your voice today. As you, through the Holy Spirit, are saying those things to God the Father and God the Son, I want you to think about the time in your life, the situation, where you felt let down by Jesus. You asked for his help. You needed him. And he didn't seem to show up in time. I want you to feel that pain in your story. And then I want to ask you, are you allowing your past pain and disappointments to distract you from Jesus' present power? Because that is what is happening with Martha. It's real pain. It's real disappointment. And Jesus knows it and he feels it. But we can't let the times where we think Jesus didn't show up the way we needed him to distract us from what Jesus can do today. Because I think a lot of us, even in this moment, have settled for a different kind of faith where we say, Jesus, If you'd only shown up before I lost my job. Jesus, if you'd only shown up before my marriage imploded, maybe we could have a better, trust between us. If you'd shown up before I needed life-altering surgery, like, where were you then, Jesus? It's too late. Had you been here, X, Y, or Z wouldn't have had to happen. Insert whatever your trauma is from your story today. And now I want you to listen to the half of a hope that Martha has in verse 22. If you'd only been here, he wouldn't have died. Verse 22, but even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Here's what I think Martha's saying. Jesus, I'm mad. And I'm hurt. But you're here now. And I'm still going to trust you. So that's noble in and of itself. But my question is, how has the trust changed? Before, I genuinely imagine a trust that when they heard the messengers say he's going to be okay, that they just believed it entirely. Jesus can do anything. But I wonder if that trust is different. Maybe the trust has transitioned to how we trust Jesus a little bit. Like, my life's not going to be any different, but one day I'll go to heaven. That's not the trust that Jesus asks for in this passage. She's thinking, you're here now. I know you're going to get me through it. You'll be my buddy and my pal. But obviously, the type of life-altering power I thought you had isn't true. That's what I read into this story. Even now, I believe you'll give me whatever I ask. So Jesus tests this trust level. Here's what he says. Your brother will rise again, verse 23. And she says, yeah, I know, Jesus. One day I'll see him when I see everybody else, the end of the age when everybody rises, right? That kind of hope. Because he's beyond help now. You can't resurrect my disappointments and my griefs. And Jesus tells her, to the face of that level of trust, but I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me may never die. Do you believe this, Martha? Do you believe it? And she says, yeah, I believe it. I've heard you say, I've seen you do too many things to not believe that you're the Messiah. But I'm just not so sure what that means for me now. I've always believed you're the Messiah, the Son of the God, and the one who's come to the world from God, but does that mean that you're actually going to radically change my life? Does that mean that I am actually good for something for your kingdom? Does that mean that you really can deal with the pain and the hurt and the disappointment and the traumas of my past? I believe it, I guess, but I don't know if I trust you anymore. Anybody got a Martha level faith today? I can't believe in anything else than Jesus is the Savior of the world, but I don't really know what he's doing to save me. This is a rock hard, very human passage. You can feel the pain. So I want you to hear Jesus' words to your Martha faith today. I am the resurrection and the life. I think you've underestimated me. Mary goes back, verse 28. Martha returns to Mary, and she calls Mary aside from the mourners and says, the teacher is here. Notice, formal title. He's not buddy Jesus anymore. He's the teacher. He didn't show up. He's just teach now. The teacher's here, and he wants to see you. So Mary immediately went, and it's not pretty. I don't think she took the time that Martha did to kind of, put a face back on and think through the questions and get in her head what she wanted to say. Mary just immediately goes out there as an emotional wreck, as a grieving person who doesn't understand what's happening. It's ugly. And this is what happens. Verse 30. Jesus stayed outside of the village at the place where Martha met him. When the people were at the house consoling Mary saw that she left so hastily, they assumed that she was going to Lazarus to weep by his grave. So they followed her. They went with her to be a comfort. And when Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet. No shoving, but it's the same line. And the tone is different. Lord, if you'd only been here, you wouldn't have died. We asked for you to, where were you in my pain? Where were you in his pain? You asked us to trust you. It's just broken. There's no answers there. She's grieving. And this response from Jesus is initially baffling. This is what happens when he sees this woman at his feet, which she'll end up at again very shortly, because the story shifts. This grieving woman, broken. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and saw all the people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him. Does that make you mad? He doesn't look at her, offer her a hand up, go in for a hug, and say, it's going to be okay. I'm here now. I'll help you through it. Looking at her pain, a deep anger wells up. Wouldn't you think that the only people in this story who have a right to be mad are Mary, Martha, and Lazarus? Not Jesus. He's the one who didn't come. But the pain and the anger in him is from something different. He sees the warped reality, what death does to us, the way it breaks down our trust in the one who can overcome death. Because Jesus was able to see past Lazarus' tomb. He knew there was more to the story. Nobody else did. Death does that to us. The finality of it just seems to destroy everything. It's destroyed Mary, and it makes Jesus very mad. This is what he says. Where'd you put him? You can imagine the tone. Where'd you put him? They say, Lord, come and see. And then Jesus wept. I'm grateful for this verse, are you? This balances out the rest of the story. That beginning thing, Lazarus is dead and I'm glad. That being mad in front of the very human pain of his friend, when he takes in the whole situation, Jesus just breaks down and cries. You need to know this truth today. God doesn't enjoy your pain. He hates it, and he weeps for you. God doesn't look at you down from heaven as like a little kind of spider struggling in water, trying to get out of the sink, laughing. That's not our God. Our God hates the situation, hates that sin has put you in the situation, and loves you literally to death. And he's going to show up just like he did for Jesus. We know that Jesus doesn't like our pain so much because in just a few chapters, he takes all of our pain on the cross so you don't have to bear it anymore. That's how much Jesus hates your pain, not you. But then somebody in the crowd says what you and I have already been intimating this entire time. I love this person in the crowd because this is me. Right? Verse 37, but someone says, this man healed the blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? Right? Enter the mystery of how God works sometimes. Because sometimes we pray, and we pray hard. And he doesn't give us the answer we're looking for. Sometimes when we say we need him, he's not there on our time. And I know that there are people in this room who have seen dreams and careers and relationships and even people in your life die when you've been asking God so fervently for them not to, and you're left wondering why. Just like Mary and her brokenness, or like this calculated person from the crowd. He healed the blind man. Why didn't he save me? Why didn't he keep Lazarus from dying? And I think one of the things that we learn from John chapter 11 is maybe your unanswered prayer isn't a roadblock. Perhaps it's just a speed bump. Like a lot of times when we don't get the answer we want in the time frame that we want, we're like, oh, doors closed, dead and gone. The stone is in front of the tomb. But maybe, just maybe, there's something else going on, and God's going to do something through your situation that would mean more than it ever could have before. I think sometimes in our lives, there are things that just need to die for God to show his resurrection power. Verse 38, the story continues. Jesus was still mad when he arrived at the tomb. A cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. And he says, roll the stone aside. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protests, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. we would change that to say, you're too late. The smell will be terrible. Jesus, it's great you're here now. Thanks. But we needed you 4 days ago. Maybe if you were here one day late, we've seen you raise people from the dead or from the brink. Maybe one day, maybe even two. Enter some Jewish folklore here. Did you know that Jews of the day, by and large, believed that by the end of the third day, the soul left? Because rot had set in, and your soul would look at your face and not be able to recognize itself and say, oh, I give up, be gone. You shouldn't believe that, but that's what they believed in the day. So at 4 days, you're not just dead, you're dead. Jesus, this situation at this point is beyond your control. You can't help anymore. You needed to show up before this happened. And Jesus, when she says this it's going to stink, you know what she's saying? I can't stand you opening this door again. I'm not emotionally available for this. I can't allow you to open this door in my life and me be disappointed again. I can't go through Lazarus dying part 2. Insert your trauma. The dream you've given up on. The relationship that imploded. I can't go back and I can't darken these doors. Some doors, Jesus, need to be left closed. But Martha protests. The Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Maybe Jesus is speaking to you those same words, to your heart, the door that you want to keep closed because it's dead and gone and stanky. Roll away the stone. Jesus responds to her apprehension saying this, didn't I tell you that you'd see God's glory if you believe? You said you believe me. Do you trust me? So they roll the stone aside, and Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You've always heard me. And I'm saying this out loud for the sake of everybody standing here so they'll believe that you sent me. And Jesus shouts to the situation that's dead and gone, Lazarus, come out. And you know what happens? He stinking came out. Like, still zombie wrapped. And he has to say, unwrap this guy. Come on, help him. He can't breathe. I can't resurrect him twice. Get in there quick. I can't help but wonder if Jesus isn't opening big doors for you today that you're afraid to walk in. And it begs the question, what might Jesus resurrect in your life if you choose to trust him today? I think this is an appropriate thing for you to literally take your bulletin that has a note space on it on purpose to spend a minute with God and say, what is that thing for me? What is the tomb that I've just given up on and asked Jesus to keep the stone in front of? The dream that he had for you? The God-sized dream that you couldn't forget back in the day, but you think your window's closed? The calling? The relationship? Where has trust broken down for you? Write it down and just see if the Holy Spirit doesn't whisper into your ear, roll the stone away. And name your situation and say, come back to life. This miracle, the raising of Lazarus, literally puts Jesus on the cross a couple chapters later. It's after this where he risks everything to resurrect his buddy that the Pharisees say, we can't put up with this any longer. And they plan to start killing him. Not just thinking about we're going to make this happen. Did you know that Jesus died for you too? He's still willing to risk whatever he's got to do to resurrect what he needs to resurrect in your life. It's not too late. In fact, it might actually be just the right time. That's kind of how God does things.